Teleportation will commence in 5 minutes. Do not leave any luggage unattended. Unattended luggage will be removed and destroyed. Attention, ladies and gentlemen. This is an announcement from Planet X31. Please take your seats. Teleportation will commence in 2 minutes.
Greetings, Earthlings, and welcome to this episode of Science and Cocktails. Science and Cocktails is an initiative with the purpose of bringing first-class scientific information directly to you, Earthlings, without interference of any other type, sort of intermediate media. Its aim is to make the flow of thoughts and the flow of sensorial perception as smooth as the flow of a cocktail mixture. Tonight's teleportation will be guided by a very special guest that has flown all the way from England to Denmark. Armand Leroy is a broadcaster, author, and professor of evolutionary biology at Imperial College London. His book, The Mutants, has won the Guardian First Book Award in 2004. His recent research consists of applying evolutionary biology techniques to the history of music. He will try to answer some fundamental questions about species in general. For example, are all animals able to create music? And in specific for humans, where does this inspiration for creating music comes from? He will try to argue that like DNA, music is transmitted from person to person, from generation to generation. And like DNA, one can apply evolutionary techniques and mathematics in order to reconstruct the distant path that music has followed. In this way, will he be able to recreate the primordial sounds of existence?
Ladies and gentlemen, the words of Armand Leroy will be represented by the artist Henrik Schützen, and afterwards we will have a soul horn performance, which consists of a demonstration by a manual-operated sculptural installation. It is a concrete form of experiment where the focus shifts from sound to performer and to visual images.
Transmission.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us give a big applause to Armand Leroy.
It's coming up. Well, thank you, Christiania. I just don't know how I can even begin to top that. I mean, you might as well just go home now. Listen, people say thank you very much for having me here. Indeed, as was said, I want to talk about the evolution of music and try to tell you some of the things that me and my group have been doing to reconstruct the history of music and study its dynamics. And I guess the thing about it that is interesting is that we tend to think of music and culture in general as something that is produced by geniuses, the people who actually make the stuff, and that is consumed by us in a sort of a deep emotional way. I mean, after all, that's what music is all about. But the thing that I want you to take away is that actually all of that can be studied in a very scientific way, and that there's data in there, information in there, that we can use and analyze and begin to understand using the kinds of techniques that evolutionary biologists have developed. And let me just try to tell you how we begin. So we are all, many of you will be familiar with the idea that we can look in our genomes and the proteins and the structures of our bodies, and that we can use those to reconstruct our history, our evolutionary history, how particular genes are related to each other, how particular species are related to each other. And all that comes from the basic idea that if you look at the diversity of stuff that we see in the world, humans, species, genes, proteins, that all that diversity contains within it the information that arises from its history. And that if we analyze that diversity correctly, we can reconstruct that history by, for instance, making evolutionary trees. Now that's a pretty familiar idea, and the kind of diagram that I've got up there, well, this is just a collection of proteins which show the relationships between each other as analyzed by evolutionary biologists, and you can see they're all related to each other in complicated ways. Well, I'm going to argue that we can do the same thing with music. And to begin with, let me just give you a sense of what I'm talking about. If we go around the world and we look at the way in which people make music in traditional societies around the world, we find that they make them in very, very different ways. So, for example, and what I want you to listen to here is not the words, which you won't be able to understand because they're in Mabaka, a particular pygmy language, but rather the way in which the music is actually made. Let me see if I can do this. So these are Mabuti pygmies, and this is what they sound like. So you've got a group of Mabuti pygmies, and they just killed an elephant, and they're terribly happy about it. And they're singing away how happy they are to have killed their elephant, and they're singing in this beautiful polyphonic harmony, which is quite unlike a harmony that we would be familiar with. It's in many different polyphonic lines, musical lines, going simultaneously. All right, so that's the Mabuti. What about these guys? So these are Inuit, and what you have to imagine is that we have a man sitting on an ice floe, he's singing to himself, and he's just groaning. A deep, guttural monotone. And he will do that for hours. And we don't have to follow him and listen to him for hours, but you get the idea, basically. And here's another track, and this is from some Hebridean Scottish women who are, back in the 1940s, dyeing some wool. And it's a working song. Excuse me, here we go. A beautiful combined harmony of them singing together. So you can see that the way in which these songs are structured, whether it's one person or several people singing, whether they're singing together, whether they're singing separately, are very different. And that's only a very small sample of the kinds of diversity that we see in the world. Anyway, so a few years ago, about 6 years ago, I was at a dinner in London, and I was sitting next to this little bald guy, all right, so two bald guys are sitting next to each other, and one said to the other, "So what do you do?" He said, "You know, I'm an evolutionary biologist." And he said, "Well, I'm a musician." And so he said, "Well, what's your name?" And he said, the other guy said, "I'm Brian Eno." And And you began, as an evolutionary biologist and a musician do, when they began talking about, music and evolution. And of course, Eno is, like a super intellectual guy who's interested in many different things. And we began talking about the evolution of music. And I asked him the sort of obvious question that evolutionary biologists would ask is, given that people have reconstructed the history of language in much the same way that geneticists reconstruct the history of genes, has anybody done the same thing for music? And he said, well, actually, there is somebody who once attempted such a project, and he's a very interesting figure. He's a guy called Alan Lomax. Now, I don't know if this name means anything to you, but if you like the blues, or if you, for instance, saw some years ago, there was a film, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, with George Clooney, and he's a bunch of guys going around the South, and it had a wonderful soundtrack. It was all the original blues stuff. Well, that was collected by Alan Lomax and his father, John Lomax, back in the 1930s through 50s. They went around the South. They were ethnomusicologists collecting these tracks, and much of what we know about American blues music and the history of American music is due to them. But here's the thing. So Lomax Jr., Alan, a little bit unusually for an ethnomusicologist and a folkie, because he was there down in the village when Bobby Dylan was Bobby, doing their thing back there in the 60s. A little bit unusually, he had a strong analytical mind, bent of mind, and he had a variety of theories as to what shapes the diversity of music around the world, how particular societies and social structures shape music. And the ethnomusicologists at the time really didn't get into this at all. They laughed at him. And so he said, well, I'll show you. And what he did is he managed to get $1 million from the National Institutes of Mental Health for whatever reason in the United States. And this is in the 1960s, so it's big money. And what he did with that is he developed this science called Cantometrics, song measurement, right? Cantometrics. And he collected thousands, tens of thousands of songs from around the world, and this is doing it the hard way, right? Splicing tape and all that stuff. And then he got people to listen to those songs and measure them in various ways, just by listening to the audio quality, and developed this big database, which he then put into a computer. And bear in mind, this is now 1960s, so we're talking a computer the size of a house there at Columbia, and it's all done on cardboard punch cards and all that sort of stuff. And he developed the system, and he published a handful of papers and a book called Folk Song Style and Culture, and a paper in Science, which crunched all these numbers down and attempted to show the deep patterns in music. Anyway, I was fascinated by this, and I said, look, whatever Lomax was doing back there in the 1960s, this data are incredibly valuable. I'm going to see if I can get this data, and I'm going to see if I can apply new techniques, new computer algorithms to reconstruct the history of music. So I went to New York City, and there Lomax had died in the meantime, but his daughter was still tending his archive, which was this amazing collection of tapes and generations of computers like Mac Quadras and all this stuff sitting around there. And I managed to get the data, and we began to reanalyze it. And that's the first thing I want to tell you about what we found. So, to give you a sense of what we're talking about, what Lomax did is he developed a system, let's say, called Cantometrics, and he got a whole load of undergraduates to listen to these songs and score them for these kinds of variables. So, for instance, how many singers it has, the form of the vocal part, the form of the overlap alteration, whether it's a polyphonic type, what kind of polyphony is involved, and so on and so forth. And so we got all this data, we crunched it down, and the first thing that we hoped we would do is that we would be able to reconstruct an evolutionary tree of the sort that evolutionary biologists do. And our hope was, as per the introduction, that we could even actually begin to unravel and identify the very first songs sung by human beings. Needless to say, we didn't. And I'll tell you why. And the reason is because, unlike species which evolve, as they evolve, they divide in a neat, nice, branch-like fashion, in which you have one species dividing into two species and dividing into two species. The evolution of music doesn't look like that. It looks much more like a network. I mean, this is obvious, in which you have one branch of music, then recombining with another branch of music to form a new branch. And if you have that, then it becomes incredibly difficult to reconstruct the history of music. It looks more like the human population as a whole, in which, yes, there are separations in the human population from one part of the world to the other, but there's a huge amount of promiscuity and mixing back and forth in between. And so inspired by that, we borrowed an idea from a program called Structure, a statistical program called Structure, which is a way of analyzing genes, genetic information from around the world, and which divides the world. You basically feed your data from people from out the world, and you give it to this program, and you say, divide the world into two parts, and then it divides it into this part, Asia versus of the rest, and then you say, divide it into 3 parts, 4 parts, 5 parts, 6 parts, and you understand the structure of the world. It's a kind of clustering technique, if that means anything to you, which is much simpler and more powerful in some ways than building an evolutionary tree. And that's what we did for the music. Now, if we take all the Lomax's 10,000 songs and we crunch them down and we divide them up, it could be the case that the computer will divide them into happy songs, or sad songs, or wedding songs, and working songs, and so on. But the most obvious thing you can do is to take those different clusters which you identify and map them geographically and see if there's any geographic information in them. Do people in different parts of the world sing differently? And if so, what are the patterns? And the answer is that it's perhaps not surprising, and yet in a way it is that yes, there is that information. So if we divide the world of music, as given our sample, into 7 clusters, what we find is that there's a big South American cluster here, big Sub-Saharan African cluster here. There's a couple of American clusters. There's a big European cluster here in blue, and then there's several Pan-Asian clusters here, and then a Melanesian cluster. And I don't have time to talk about them all. By the way, just in case you're wondering, who all these people in the middle of the Atlantic are, the answer is, and down here in the Atlantic, the answer is very simple, is that we didn't have space on the map to put them in America where they should be. These are immigrant populations, and over here, these are our Caribbean Africans who should be up here. But anyway, so we just popped them down there. So the thing is, so what we immediately discovered is that it's something that the ethnomusicologists had forgotten, that there is history, and that there is big, deep geographical divides. And the reason why I say that ethnomusicologists have forgotten about that is because ethnomusicology, along with much of cultural anthropology and so on, had moved away from the great comparative studies of the 19th century into sort of very micro studies of particular societies at particular places. This kind of macro comparative study was really unfashionable. And yet, when you analyze this data in this way, you see these big patterns pop up, and the question is, what do they mean? Well, I just want to show you a little bit about what we think they mean. So let's look at one of these clusters, which is the Sub-Saharan cluster. And what you see is that it reaches up here into the Cameroons and Côte d'Ivoire around here, goes down through into Central Africa, down here into Southern Africa, and then reaches over here into the Caribbean. And this map over here is just another way of representing the same data using a fancier statistical technique. So what do we think that means? Well, the answer, we think, is reasonably clear, that this is a consequence of the Bantu expansion, which occurred around 2,500 years ago. And just to give you a sense of how conserved music is, I mean, this is even just at and even a much narrower time scale. You just got to listen to it. So the first track over here is a bunch of Swazi braves, so Swaziland, Southern Africa, and they're psyching each other up for a bit of a combat. So that's the captain who's giving the call, and then immediately you get a response, right? And this is a style that you can hear right across Africa. That's what defines this cluster C. Okay. Now, listen to this. That's a song called Rosie, which Lomax recorded from an Alabama chain gang in 1956. And you can see that despite the fact that the language is different, the context is different, one is a bunch of Swazi braves and others an Alabama chain gang, despite the fact that they've been separated by hundreds of years, ever since the abolition of slavery, the basic song structure, that call and response, that smooth harmony has maintained itself. And so I would argue that if that can maintain itself over the course of a few hundred years, that actually that's what we're looking at here in terms of a migration event that has occurred over thousands of years. And that seems amazing. It seems surprising that a single song style, that call and response structure, and there are many other things associated with it, can maintain itself for so long. But I'll just ask you to point out that, or just point out that if you look at the archaeological evidence and then the linguistic evidence, you also see that the Bantu sub-language family is also strikingly homogeneous. And then if you look at the genetic evidence, you see exactly the same pattern. And all this suggests that what we've got here is a song style that originated in West Africa, somewhere in the vicinity of the Cameroons, approximately 2,500 years ago. And then with the spread of the Bantu pastoralists over the last 2,500 years, has spread right through Africa, right down to the Cape, where we come to the Swazis. And that it's, in fact, a very ancient song style. Now, it may seem surprising that the song style can be 2,500 years ago, but I have a suspicion, actually, that some song styles that we're listening to in different parts of the world are even much more ancient. Let me show you what I mean. So if we go to the Americas, what we find is that there are two really striking song styles, which we call cluster F and cluster I. And one of these clusters here, the purple one here, is found sporadically down from Patagonia, right up through Mesoamerica, right up here, and up even into the Inuit, and then you don't see it on this particular map, but you'll see it over here, even through to the east, East Asia. And I just want you to listen to this and see if you can pick out what our numbers are picking out. So the first track here is this one. It's a deep, throaty, solitary singer sitting there on a rock and groaning to himself for hours. All right, so then we go, that's the Ainu, one of the indigenous people of Japan. And then we go to the Inuit over here of Canada, which you've already heard. Again, you can see the basic song structure. Song style is very similar. And then listen to this one. This is from the opposite end of the continent. This belongs to the Selknam people, now extinct, wiped out by Argentinian sheep herders in the 1920s. And this is what they sounded like. You can see the basic similarity in style, and that's essentially what our algorithms are quantifying when they pull those song styles together. What's the most parsimonious explanation for this? Well, it's possible that this is a very recent song style that has somehow swept from one part of the Americas right throughout the Americas and into East Asia, but actually the most obvious explanation is that this is a song style that is very ancient and that actually came over from the Americas with the original migration of people across the Bering Land Bridge here around 14,000 years ago, spread throughout the Americas and has remained in various parts of the Americas as a sort of, as an indigenous song style. If that explanation is true, that suggests that that song style is on the order of 14,000 years old, that it's been conserved and maintained for that long. Let me give you another example, and I think this is a particularly wonderful example. There are these two groups of peoples in Africa. There's the Pygmies of the Congo, and there's the Kung Bushmen of the Kalahari, the Sand Bushmen. They're called by various names. Bushman is often thought not to be a very correct way to term it, but it's convenient. It's a convenient name for them. They don't have much in common. The Kung live in the Kalahari Desert. The Pygmies live in the Congo. They have completely unrelated languages. They're short, but that's not much to go by in terms of commonality. And yet I want you to listen to their music. So here, this is the sorry, let me just play this track. This is. I've got two tracks playing at once there. Here, let me try the Mabuti Pygmies, which you've already heard. Okay, so it's that complicated polyphony, right? Okay, now, listen to the Kung. Again, it's exactly the same kind of song. It's that very complicated interwoven polyphony. And here's the thing, these people have a few things in common. They're hunter-gatherers, they're short, they live in marginal habitats, but otherwise they're completely separated from each other. From an evolutionary point of view, these are various graphs which just show that they're among the earliest branches that have split off from the bulk of the human population. But that doesn't actually make much difference. But the striking thing is that they seem to sing in very much the same way. So what do we think is going on? What we suspect is happening here is that these are in fact relict populations. These are the remains, the remote remains in the Congo and in the Kalahari of a musical style that was once much more widespread through Africa when these people were dominated Africa, but which then became effectively obliterated by the Bantu expansion, the pastoralists who came down with their new song style, their new language, and of course their new economic system of cattle and all that sort of thing, and pushed these people into the margins so that now this culture only survives in these remote places, and yet they're so strikingly similar. So we think that this is in effect a relict population that exists, a relict song style that last was a common culture some 2,500 years ago. Right. So I could tell you many such stories about the history of human music as we see around the world. For instance, I could talk about how you see the expansion of song styles that follow the Polynesian migration out to from Indonesia and Taiwan and Indonesia out into New Zealand and Easter Island, which also shows a very strong homogeneous signal. Or I could talk to you about the Pan-Asian song styles, some of which appear to be much more recent and show the impact of the spread of Islam around the year 900, which had a huge effect upon song styles ranging from Europe right through to Central Asia. But I have other things to tell you about, and one of the things I want to tell you about is a very different kind of project. So, evolutionary biologists, when they study the evolution of organisms, part of what they do, of course, is they study animals in the wild, all the creatures in the world. But they don't just do that, and the reason for that is because it's very difficult to, evolution is a dynamic process, and of course it's very difficult to observe the dynamics of evolution in the wild. And so what people do is they study the evolution of very simple organisms such as bacteria in the laboratory, where you can actually watch evolution happen in front of your eyes. And this graph shows a very famous experiment among evolutionary biologists in which they take some bacteria, this is just bog standard E. coli, stuff that is in your gut, and what they've done is that they keep this stuff, they grow up these bacteria in flasks of glucose, of minimal medium, and they've just kept them generation after generation after generation, and what they've seen is how these bacteria then adapt to this new environment and evolve, and they can study the dynamics. And this is a famous series of papers which have allowed us to give a real microcosm, a real snapshot of evolution in action, and test theories about the evolution of what drives evolution and what constrains evolution directly in the laboratory. Is it limited? Sure. I mean, it's a flask in the laboratory. It's not exactly wild, but still, it's useful information. Well, we figured we could do something similar with respect to music. We figured we needed to set up a system in which we studied the evolution of music in an experimental way. And we developed this system called DarwinTunes. Sure. Okay, so DarwinTunes, and we did this in 2009, which is the big Darwin anniversary. So DarwinTunes is a system for studying how music evolves in a very restricted environment. And the way it works is this. We have a computer, and the computer generates little songs, and these songs are 8 seconds long, which is called loops, right? And each of these songs is represented by a bit of code, and this is sort of what the code looks like. It's a little branching diagram, and each of these nodes represent some quality, like the fact that some note must be played at a particular time for a particular length of time, or a particular tempo, and so on and so forth, right? And this structure is actually designed explicitly to mimic what it's a modular structure, so it's designed explicitly to sort of mimic the way in which proteins and genes are structured, that is to say, in a sort of a modular way. And the reason for that is important, is because here's what we do, is that these songs, we start off with, we get the computer to generate a song, but we don't just get it to generate one song, we get it to generate 100 songs. And those songs are random songs, that is to say, the values, the kinds of notes they play, the tempo, and so on, or whether there's even any notes at all. It's all just given random values. And as you can imagine, if you generate 100 songs filled with random values, you don't get 100 very good sounding songs, right? I mean, they're 100 8-second loops of sound that just sound terrible. All right. But here's the thing. For those of you who know something about computation, I'll just give the punchline. They're genetic algorithms. And what that means is that these songs, each of them, can get together, have sex, and have baby songs, right? So what that means, I mean literally in the sense of having sex in the way that, well, not literally, but conceptually, in the way that the reasons for evolutionary biologists is the reason you have sex is to recombine, right? Yeah. So it's to take two genomes, you take one genome from one song, take a genome from another song, the genome, the code, right? You mix the code up, and then those songs, those two parent songs have baby songs, and those baby songs are a mixture of the parent songs, right? So, okay, you've got 100 really rubbish songs, and those songs have sex with each other, and they produce 100 new songs, and those songs, of course, will sound really rubbish as well, right? It's hardly a surprise. Okay, fine. So what we do then, but here's the thing, is we take those songs and we stream them to the web, and we ask people to rate those songs from 1 to 5, I love, I hate. And we only let the songs that people like rate highly. Those are the songs that get to have sex and reproduce, the rest we just kill off. This will be obvious to you is just a representation of what happens in Darwinian natural selection. We're applying natural selection to music or to sound, right? And if we run that process then for 2,500 generations, right? In principle, by the logic of evolutionary biology, the logic of natural selection, Darwin's process, we should generate music out of noise. All right, so what did we actually do? So we ran several different channels. We had a public channel, so we streamed this out and we got some, made some media stuff about it. And so we got about, 6,900 punchers listening to the songs and rating them. And we got about 85,000 raters, and we 2,500 generations of evolution, 50,000 songs were born and died, and then we also, because I'm a professor and I can control a whole bunch of students, I made them do it too. And what did we find? Well, let me show you the numbers first. If you take the songs that we got at the end of all those generations, and you take sample songs throughout that process, and then you ask people to re-rate them against each other, and we can actually ask whether they prefer songs that are later rather than earlier, and so you actually get an index of musicality. By musicality means what do people prefer, right? And what we find is that over the first 300 generations, so musicality, what people prefer, increases very, very rapidly, and then it plateaus. It doesn't go on forever. But clearly, we're evolving a preference here. People are finding these songs later on much more preferable aesthetically relative to these songs earlier on. Now, the songs over here are evolving continuously, and we'll come back to why this is. But they don't seem to be getting any better, and that's very interesting in itself. Now, there's a whole new science called musical information retrieval, MIR. Many of you will have on your phones a program called Shazam or SoundHound or something, so you hear a song you like and you hold it up and then it identifies it for you. Well, underlying that is a whole set of algorithms which are taking the sound surface and then sucking out numbers from them and matching those numbers against a database. Well, essentially we use that same technology, but we use sort of specific aspects of it, so we can measure whether the particular qualities of our songs, right? So, for instance, we can measure in this graph whether our music is becoming more chordy. By that I mean, are we actually generating songs which have canonical chords as opposed to just random combinations of notes. And we find that our songs are becoming increasingly chordy as time goes by. And we can also then get a measure of rhythmicity, what's the rhythmic complexity of our music. And we find that our songs are becoming increasingly rhythmic over time, but then that plateaus too. All right, well, I mean, I can show you all the numbers you can possibly want, because one of the beautiful things about the system is that, we're watching this population evolve, and we're like, God, we know everything about it, right? We can see every baby that's born, every parent that gives birth. We have the genotype, the phenotype. We know everything about these things, but what you really want to do is just listen to the music, all right? So listen to this and tell me what you think. So we began with the public channel. This is where we begin, right? And this gives you a sample of the kinds of stuff that people were listening to. And let me just hear it. So it's pretty hard going, right? I mean, I have to say, just as an aside, the guy who invented this was a colleague of mine, a mosquito bioinformatician, sort of a computational genius, who invented this system. And he sort of built it and put it on the web, and he sort of hoped that people would just come and play with and listen to this thing and rate the music, and that fantastic music would evolve. But of course, the basic flaw of it is that actually people come and maybe they listen once, but after you listen to about 5 minutes of that stuff, they basically say, yeah, I got the idea, and they sort of push on. So it's actually quite difficult to get, suffice to say, it didn't go viral, right? All right, but with enough media push behind it, we got, as I said, we got about 6,000 people rating this stuff. And at the end of those 2,500 generations, what we came up with something like this. I'm not saying it's Mozart. It's something between, the more dismal end of electronica and a really good ringtone. but here's the thing. I mean, it's amazing in some way. I mean, here's the thing that you have to appreciate is that if it's not obvious, is that this is music that is made without a composer. Or maybe it's not just, to put it another way, there's not one composer. There's 6,000 odd composers. It's music, a cultural artifact, order created out of disorder that is done entirely by the mass participation of just people choosing one preference over another for generation after generation. All right, so we published this paper and made a little bit of noise. Scientists make music without composer, sort of the public punchline. But actually, that wasn't so much the interesting part. Really, the interest of the paper actually really came down. And we're going to get a little bit arcane now, but it's the fact that the music improved for quite some time. But then, as you'll notice from those graphs, it continued to change, but it didn't seem to get any better, at least however you rate it. And we were interested to know why that is. So one possibility, and this, again, is just drawing straight from evolutionary biology, is that maybe the music was just as good as it could get given the constraints of the system. One way to envision evolution by natural selection is as evolution as a landscape. Many of you will have read Richard Dawkins' books, Climbing Mount Improbable. Well, that's a metaphor of evolution climbing a mountain, populations climbing a mountain, becoming ever fitter, ever better. That goes back to the 1930s to a guy called Sewell Wright, to envision evolution as a landscape. And here we've made this landscape very concrete. We've actually measured it. This is rhythmicity, this is chordality. And here's our songs over here where we start, and our population is evolving up Mount Musical, if you will, and it's coming here, and what we expect it to do is we expect it to hit the peak over here, and maybe stop, because this is the best possible music that this system can evolve. I mean, of course, it could evolve something better if it were a different system, but this is the local optimum. And what we find is that it doesn't do that at all. In fact, it sort of sits there, part way up the musical mountain. It doesn't get as good as it does, it just sort of footles around there, and that's where it ends up. And the question is why? One possibility is that we've just exhausted all the good music, the better songs that are in that population that is there, that there just aren't any better variants. But we measured the amount of variation that is found in the system across these populations over time, and we found there's an abundant amount of variation. Something else is going on. Well, to figure that out, and here we become a little bit arcane, but it's really interesting, is we use something called the price equation. And the price equation, how to describe it? It's an incredibly simple equation. Delta Z equals covariance, the covariance of fitness with change and plus the expectation. But let me just try to give you a sense of what it's about. Well, first, let me just tell you quickly about its history. There was this guy, George Price, an American, who was sort of an unappreciated genius. He worked at Los Alamos, worked at the Bell Labs, and then in the 1960s came to London and taught himself evolutionary theory and developed this equation which is a whole new fundamental theorem which underlies all evolutionary processes of the most general sort. And it's incredibly simple, it's almost tautologous, but it is the most general description, and it doesn't just apply to organisms, it applies to any variational selectional system. To give an example of the kind of thing that he said it could describe, he said, if imagine you've got an old-fashioned radio and you're trying to find the station, a particular station, and you're twisting the dial back and forth, right? And you're searching for that station, and you hear the station, and you narrow it down, Well, that's a variational selectional system. His equation could describe it. And that's how general it is. It could describe the evolution of chemical systems. He said you could apply it to the evolution of the cosmos if you wanted to. But it's a wonderful and abstract thing. And because it's so general and doesn't depend upon any of the details of biology, we figured we could use this equation to unravel what's going on here. Anyway, before I do it, just tell you, Price. It's a strange story. So Price is sort of this genius who came out of nowhere, did a couple of papers in which he cashed out these equations, and then he went mad and got religion, saw God in everywhere he went, gave all his money to the homeless, and committed suicide at the age of 45 by cutting his throat with a pair of nail scissors. I mean, it's strange, and it's just one of the strangest and wonderful, tragic stories of evolutionary biology. Anyway. But he left us his equation, and we used his equation. I won't try to walk through these graphs in detail, but I'll try to give you an idea of why we think the songs didn't get any better. And it's pretty intuitive in some ways. What we think is happening is that sex is killing them, in effect, because as songs, what sex is about is fundamentally about mixing different genomes up, right? Different songs up. And you can see that if you have some songs that are really rubbish, and you have two songs that are really rubbish, and you mix them up, then because they're really rubbish, the babies will be really rubbish as well. But it doesn't matter that different parts of the genomes, different qualities of the genomes get mixed up. But once you've evolved the songs and you actually have something like a song, which is a complex and integrated structure all of its own, with a particular rhythm, a particular sequence of notes, all of which work together in a synergistic way to give you that quality that you like. And of course, this must be the way that music works. If you've got two such things and then you mix them together, you can see that the babies will be possibly very poor, much poorer than the parents are. And so what you get is that mixture process causes a downward pressure on the progress of quality. Every time that evolution and selection is improving things, recombination, sex is messing them up until you come to some equilibrium, and that's where you just stay exactly. And we speculate that this kind of process, which must be operating in populations which do not have mechanical means of reproduction, may be the explanation for why the kinds of music that we listen to in different parts of the world, or the traditional music, has been so conserved for so long. But that's a speculation. Well, the real thing that I spoke to you. Okay, I spoke to you about musical information retrieval technology, and about how you can suck out numbers from songs and analyze them, such as the chordality and rhythmicity and so on. Well, one of the things we want to do is go back to Lomax's database and reanalyze the world of music. We now use 1 million songs. It's pretty easy. And we're in the process of doing that. But we thought, actually, before we even get back to the exotica of all the world's music, why don't we just do something really easy, which is begin to analyze the music of our own times. And how do we analyze the music of our times? So we have to delimit that universe in some way. So we said, what the hell, we're going to look at the UK and US top 50, 1950 to 2010, and see if we can detect patterns in the evolution of music, because we all have a story about the music of our times. Everybody thinks that they know when their best music was, when the most diverse music was, when the music died, and so on. And it's usually highly contingent on exactly how old you are. And so we said, can we actually do this and apply some science when we pull out the numbers and start crunching them? And so we went to our friends at Last.fm, which is one of these streaming services in the UK, sort of like Spotify, if you don't know it. Anyway, and they have all this stuff in their databases. And so we got around 30,000 songs, which constitute the UK, Billboard and UK Top 50, 1950 to 2010. And we ran them through our algorithms, and we sucked out hundreds of numbers. And we're just beginning to investigate. But these are the kinds of questions we're trying to ask. Has music become more complex? Has it become more diverse? How do producers and consumers shape the musical landscape? Can we predict the evolution of music? All these kinds of questions are the obvious things that we want to know. And you can actually begin to do some science with them, as opposed to just relying on the stories of, the biographies of clapped-out rockers. Anyway, to give you a sense of the kind of data that we're looking at, so we measure songs in all these different ways, and then we plot them over time, and these are the kinds of graphs, and we suck these numbers down. And one way in which we do so is this. We ask, how diverse is the music at any given time? So you can measure the distance, the musical distance between any two songs at any given time in any given year, and you can ask, what is the average distance? So if they're very different from each other, there's a big distance, they're very small. If they're very similar to each other, there's a very small difference. All right, so the question is, when was music in the pop charts in the last 50 years, when has it been most diverse? Is it the case that there was once a golden age in which there was all sorts of musical forms flourishing in the charts, which then got beaten down by the pressures of commercialism, such that it down to a homogeneous pop-pap? Or is it the case that the forces of globalism and multiculturalism have given us a new, richer dimension to music than we've ever seen before? Everybody's got some answer to it, but here's actually what the answer is. So if we take a look, forget the fact that there's several different graphs, what we find is if we look at the average distance between pop songs, this is the US charts, we find that actually in the 1960s, the charts are really diverse. And after that, we come down, they decline, right down to about 1986. And there's two ways of looking at it. Either we are looking at the evolution of the perfect pop song, which we reached in 1986, or else we are looking at the progressive degeneration of Western popular music. I leave such value judgments up to you, but the question is, what happened in 1986? Because in 1986, something happened in which there was a reversal in this diversity, and suddenly this incredible homogenization which occurred up to here reversed itself, and diversity increased, and it's been increasing continuously until actually fairly, with some spikes up and down, until fairly recently when it's taken a bit of a dive as well. So 1986 seems to be really critical. And the question is, what is happening over there? And I think I know the answer. And ladies and gentlemen, this is what I would argue is the single most important pop song of the 20th century. Yes. Run DMC, Walk This Way. What's so important about Run DMC Walk This Way? It was the first hip-hop song that came into the charts and basically broke open the US and the UK charts for hip-hop and made it a respectable genre. Run DMC, of course, didn't invent hip-hop. It had been sitting there for years as a whole separate genre, but this brought it into the mainstream. And after that, what you see is that the charts basically bifurcate into hip-hop and other. You have essentially what is called a speciation event, in music. And those two species have been vying ever since then for control of the charts. Let me just show you one graph, because as my little machine here is telling me that I've got to go, but this is just to give you a sense of what this graph is. This is similarity between songs. So we say, how similar are the songs of 1960 to 1960? Well, of course, they're identical, so we make them red. How similar are the songs from 1960 through to, let's say, 1990, and they're yellow, so that means they're really, really different, all right? So on the diagonal, of course, it's perfectly red, and you expect that as you go along here, it becomes increasingly yellow as the songs become increasingly dissimilar. But I want you to notice something weird that's happening here, is that as we move through to the 2000s, what we find is a whole swathe of red, which matches over to the 1970s and 80s. What it tells us that actually the music in the charts right now, over the last 5 years, is looking incredibly conservative. Ladies and gentlemen, we have gone back to, as far as our numbers are telling us, we have gone back to the 1970s and 1980s. We are in one of the great conservative phases of popular music, at least as far as the charts are concerned. Now you say, well, I'm just cool with the charts and all that stuff, but as far as the charts are concerned, as far as what it's selling, we are in a big conservative phase of a sort that hasn't been seen for many, many, many decades. And you may wonder as to why it is. What exactly is the kind of music that we're talking about here? Well, I have a suspicion, but I don't know for sure, that actually what we're really seeing here is the effect of the baby boomers. I think what's happening is that every previous generation has identified, it's been the pattern that people buy music in their teens and early 20s, and then they stop buying music, and then the next generation buys a very different kind of music, which identifies itself against what was happening previously. I think that pattern has been broken by the baby boomers. I think that basically, because of their demographic dominance, they have continued to buy music and are now buying new music in the charts, but they're buying music that basically sound like the stuff that they had when they were kids. And I think for the most part, we're basically talking about chicks with guitars, all those soulful singer-songwriter types that sort of sound like Joe Baez. I think that's essentially what's going back here, so we're seeing a very conservative trend in music. But I'm not entirely sure, and this just gives you a hint of the kinds of patterns that we're discovering in evolutionary music. And we've got a lot more to discover, at least I hope that I've shown you that there's new science out there, and this is what we can do. Thank you.